The level of happiness that you live with, guys, please hear me on this. The level of happiness you live with is a direct indication of how in alignment you are living with the law of one. Alignment with the law of one does not only take place in 3D space-time with our actions and behaviors. Every moment is a new creation. Life is constantly creating, birthing new life. So if life is in constant creation and flow, we are supposed to be in constant surrender to that flow. And at a certain point, we will be asked, or we will feel the will of God in us saying, do this, do that, go here, go there, do this, don't do this. We'll feel some kind of direction. If we want to live in perfect obedience to the law of one at all times, here's the question. How can we be sure we're doing no harm to the universe? And the answer to the question is so let's take our conversation from last week one step further. We talked about the law of one is the law of love. Yes? The law of one is the law of love. And so I want to give you, an even deeper perspective on the law of love that I've been enjoying for the last many months, going through this, pregnancy process with my wife and learning all the amazing lessons that birth has to offer us. And so this will give us a great perspective on what the law of love is. Now, I'm going to give you guys a background, kind of a personal story today on our birth journey, because it's been an interesting and powerful journey, powerful catalyst. So in 2021, Sylina and I had unexpected news that we got pregnant. And we were totally not intending for this, and it wasn't something that, we had the discussion of, children are probably a couple years in our future. We're kind of building our ministry, our purpose, our vision, our business right now. So, in a couple years when the timing feels right. And so we got pregnant before we meant to. And it was like, all right, well, this is God's will. So let's get on board with it. So even though we weren't planning to or wanting to, we said, okay, this must be life's will. Let's get into gear. But both of us had this kind of reaction of, now it doesn't feel like the right timing. And to our surprise, after maybe like 3 to 4 weeks of myself and Sylina, like me getting into full dad mode and being like, okay, I'm now a father. I have to switch into that mode and embrace it, right? It's kind of a big switch, as most of you know who are parents. And Sylina the same with motherhood. And then we find out that it was something called a blighted ovum, which is where like a gestational sac forms in the womb, but there's no fetus inside of it. And so it's, it's a type of miscarriage, but we had gotten one scan and they said, well, there's no fetus in there yet, but come back in 2 weeks, we'll scan it again. Sometimes the fetuses develop a little bit later. Came back 2 weeks later, no fetus, right? So they said, okay, this is what's called a blighted ovum. So they said, we went to like a Western medicine type of facility, and they said, okay, so the next thing we got to do is sign you up for a DNC. But it basically means a surgical procedure where they go in and remove with instruments and tools the gestational sac from the womb, from the cervix. So we were like, okay, I guess that's what you do. That's what they told us to do. And, it didn't feel great, but it was like, they told us, hey, if you don't get rid of this, it's, you could have sepsis, get infected, and you could die. So we were like, okay, well, if that's what you say, we'll trust you. We don't know anything about this yet. So we hadn't learned anything about birth and pregnancy yet. So we went through with it. And a couple weeks later, maybe 10 days later, Sylina goes through this DNC procedure. And I'm sitting there next to her, holding her hand while she's laying in there in the hospital gown, feet in the stirrups. And they proceed to do this procedure. And, the female doctor was a lovely woman. The nurses were all very sweet, great people. But man, it was just like watching my wife be tortured. It was just so difficult to move through because she was in just agonizing pain. And if you guys don't know this about Sylina, I guess you wouldn't know this about her unless you were probably married to her, but she is one of the toughest, if not the toughest women I've ever met. She's just like incredibly grounded at all times, does not have any resistance to pain. So to see her in extreme significant pain was very hard because I watched her, get injured or hurt herself many times and just like knuckle up and show no signs of, of the pain. So I knew she's in serious agony. So she's sitting there trying to, surrender to this insane amount of pain, and tears are streaming down her face. And I'm just holding her hand, like talking to her about how good she's doing and how proud I am of her. And it was really tough. And in fact, one of the nurses was also crying because it was just such a very tender and challenging moment, right? So after that experience, I felt this conviction in my spirit of like, that wasn't what God's will was for us. Like we stepped out of alignment there. I should have tuned in more and really asked, like, are we really supposed to do this? But because I didn't know any better, I'm just hearing a doctor tell us, hey, you could die if you don't do this procedure, so you got to do it. So that was a great lesson for us, right? Fast forward about a year, we got news again that we were pregnant again, right before our wedding, actually. And we were really trying not to get pregnant before the wedding, as you can imagine. And so that was another big surprise. And so same thing, we're like, all right, we're pregnant. This must be God's will. Let's fully embrace it. So Sylina was ready, getting herself mentally ready to like be showing during our wedding. And we were like, okay, but that's what God wants, that's fine. And then 5-7 weeks goes by, same thing. We did the scans and everything looked okay. And then ended up finding out that it was a miscarriage again. And so both times, it was very interesting because both times Sylina and I both had the reaction of, oh, that's not the timing we were expecting. Like, we didn't want this yet. But if it's God's will, we'll accept it. And I have a suspicion of why both of those first two pregnancies were miscarriages, because we didn't have any attachment at all to wanting to have children, as many people do. Many people are like, I gotta have a baby, it's my purpose in life. I won't feel fulfilled without one. And that's why they have kids. So we didn't have any attachment like that. We're like, hey, whenever, it's time, it'll happen, but we're not rushing it. We don't need it right now. But we also had no real resistance to it, right? It wasn't in our plans, so it was a surprise, but we immediately jumped on the horse and said, all right, this is God's will, let's do it. And so because we didn't have any attachment or resistance to the idea of having a child, I think the universe gave us our free will to choose. And our instinctual, immediate reaction in both of us when we found out the news was, ooh, I didn't want that right now. That's not what I was hoping for right now. And I think the universe said, okay, no problem, and kind of terminated the pregnancies right then and there. Because the second we decided that we wanted to get pregnant, our very first trial, we got pregnant. And here we are 9 months later. So that was another little lesson of like, when you're not stuck in attachment or aversion, you get your free will. But if you're stuck in attachment or aversion, you need to be balanced, right? As we've been talking about. And so if I have a big attachment, the universe has to bring me what I'm in resistance to, right? It has to bring me that opposite perspective until I balance it. So because we were balanced, perhaps, I think the universe gave us the free will and said, no problem. You don't have to have this pregnancy if you don't want it. So I say all that to give you a background on our birth journey of one of the lessons that I've learned. When we had the second miscarriage, same exact thing happened. The doctor said, all right, let's schedule you guys for your DNC, because you can't just let the body naturally eliminate this. The body doesn't know what to do with it. You get sepsis and you die. And I'm like, I've never heard of women dying from not getting a DNC. Like, what did women do in ancient times before they had these technologies and procedures? I'm pretty sure God made the perfect body that already knows how to handle everything that could happen in reality. So we were kind of moving that direction, and we still hadn't learned anything about birth yet. But we signed up for the DNC. We go to the appointment, and it was kind of interesting because we showed up and we had scheduled the appointment with the doctor, and we show up and they're like, oh, what are you guys doing here? We said, we're here for our appointment. Here's our schedule on our calendar. They were like, oh, we didn't have you on our calendar today. Strange. Well, sorry about that. Our bad. Let's see if the doctor can work you in today. So we were like, okay, this is very strange. Never had this happen before. So we're sitting in there. The doctor comes in and says, hey, I'm going to squeeze you guys in 45 minutes. I've got a little open window, so I'll be back. You guys wait here. And as we're waiting there, I'm just feeling that misalignment feeling again. And I learned from the last catalyst of our first miscarriage, don't repeat this mistake again. So I just sort of said out of the silence to Sylina, I said, babe, this doesn't feel right. We've already been through this process. It was one of the worst physical experiences of your life and mine. We are clearly being given a catalyst here. Are we going to make the same mistake again? I didn't feel good and you didn't feel good after the last one, so why are we doing this again? I think we need to trust the intelligence of the body to eliminate this fetus when it's ready to, and not rush the body. And Sylina was like, I think you're right. I agree. This doesn't feel right. So the doctor came back in and we said, hey, sorry, our mistake. We're actually not going to go through with the process. Thanks anyways. And they're kind of like, what do you mean you're not? Come on, we can reschedule. We're like, no, all thanks. We're good. Peace and love. We dipped out. Probably, I want to say it was like 10 weeks later, her body naturally passed the fetus on its own. No pain, just easily. And Sylina and I were like, look at that. Look at that lesson from life, to trust God's perfect way, to trust the perfect body that God already created, to trust natural law, and to know that everything God does is perfect. Only when we interfere with it does it become imperfect, and then we blame the universe, right? So this is when some months later, our discovery process of learning what birth is began. And it began with Sylina, of course, as she got pregnant with Arya 9 months ago. She started diving into birth research, and she joined this amazing community that any of you women here who plan on or currently are pregnant, highly recommend. It's called the Free Birth Society, I think. And the woman who runs it is named Emily. She has a podcast and a community, and it is just incredible. We've learned so much from her community on what birth really is. And what we've learned is that the reason that birth is such an incredibly painful and challenging experience for women in the Western world is because we do everything wrong. We completely and totally interfere with the natural birth process the way God designed it. We try to rush the process. We use drugs and chemicals to speed up the body. If you're going to a Western medicine hospital to give birth, they will say that after, I think after 38 or 40 weeks, they're going to say, hey, your baby's too late. The body is messing up here. We've got to induce you. It's a risk to go any longer. And it's one of the ways that they rush the process. And of course, we know that C-sections are incredibly prevalent in our Western medical system today. I think I've heard Zach Bush say that like 50%, almost 50% of births in hospitals are C-section, because they'll basically say, hey, any little deviation from what we think is normal, blood pressure, anything represents the body going awry. Everything's failing. Emergency. Do a quick C-section. And so they use basically everything as an excuse to push C-sections on women. And what that does is it totally ruins the natural process of birth. The baby doesn't get to experience the birth canal, which has all kinds of probiotics and stuff the baby's skin gets coated in and absorb into the baby's body to help the immune system develop, the gut microbiome develop. The baby gets pulled out of the cervix without going through the natural process. And as we say here, every time you deviate away from natural law, there is a consequence. Every step removed you move away from natural law, there's a consequence. And the further you move from natural law, the more extreme the consequences, right? So not only do they do that, but if a woman isn't going into labor when the doctors think that she should, they'll inject her with a drug called Pitocin, which chemically forces the body to go into labor. But guess what? The reason the body hasn't gone into labor yet is because the body isn't finished with all the hormone creation yet. There's an incredible amount, a gigantic elixir of hormones, and the balances between the hormones of relaxin and oxytocin, and so on and so forth, that need to be developed in a woman's body to get her body ready for birth. And this was what blew our minds, you guys. I remember when Sylina showed me this video. She started finding, through the Free Birth Society that she joined, she started finding Instagram pages called like Pain Free Birth is one of them. And there are all these videos of women giving birth at home in their birth tubs. basically what looks to be a virtually painless birth. And I was like, whoa, are you serious? I've never heard of such a thing. And she's like, watch. And so we watched a bunch of videos of women giving birth, and they're just sitting there breathing as they're standing up or, kneeling in their pool, breathing with the contractions, melting into them, totally surrendering to the process. And this baby just plops right out. The dad catches it or the midwife catches it, and the woman doesn't even make a sound. Can you believe it? And I watched over and over and over all these pain-free births. And that doesn't mean there's no discomfort. It just means there's no resistance to the discomfort. But when I watched women discussing their birth after we watched these videos, we kept seeing this pattern of all these women saying, when you do not interfere with the birth process at all, no medication, no chemicals, no drugs, just the way God intended it, the way nature designed it, a woman's body goes into a very psychedelic state. And in fact, there's lots of research on natural births that show an incredible production and release of DMT. And a lot of these women were like, I wasn't even in my body for like the whole end stage of labor. I was in this portal with God and welcoming the soul into my womb and into the world, into the earth plane. And so like, even though some women may be moaning and making painful noises, when they were interviewed after the fact, they were like, that wasn't even me. That was just the body moving energy. Like I was not present for any of that. I was in some other dimension. And we're like, oh my gosh, this is amazing. Like birth is such a miracle. But you don't get that rewarding birth experience if you're rushing the process and violating natural law, right? So I'm saying all this to you guys today to set up the point I want to teach. So birth is natural law at work. This is what I've learned. So we're doing a home birth. We have a birth pool ready. We have a naturopathic doula and midwife who are incredible. And our midwife, she's been delivering babies for like 30 years. She did it in the hospital at first and was like, oh, this is not right. This feels wrong. I don't like the way we deliver babies in the hospital. I'm going to go the natural route. And she kind of left the medical system and became an at-home doula and then midwife delivering babies. And she's delivered hundreds and hundreds of babies. And she said, I've not had one stillbirth, no deaths at all, mother or child. And not only that, she said, I've never had a single mother labor for longer than 10 hours. Isn't that incredible? That's the rewards we get for obeying natural law. If you really surrender and get out of the way of the birth process. The woman's body does it all naturally. The contractions happen, the hormones get released, everything that happens in birth is the body doing it. The woman's job is to not get in the way, to not resist, to not fight against the pain or the discomfort, but to melt into it, to surrender to it. And when the woman's able to do that, the labor is 10 times quicker. A lot of labor, she says, probably half of the women whose babies she delivers are like 3 to 4 hour labors, extremely fast. And a lot of women, if you go to the hospital, they're going to be in labor for 20 hours, sometimes 48 hours. Somebody who works on our team at 40U here, he said his wife's first birth was 56 hours of labor. So there's a big difference there, right? So if birth is natural law at work, this is the law, that you cannot improve upon the birth process. It is already perfect. And this is where Western medicine violates natural law by injecting hormones, chemicals, epidurals. I mean, when you inject an epidural into a woman's spine and just flood her body with chemicals, all those natural hormones, DMT, relaxin, oxytocin, go bye-bye. And now she's left with just the physical feelings that are happening and the intensity of these bright blue lights in her face, people with masks and goggles in her face, like she's having some kind of, terrible procedure done on herself. It's just mentally and psychologically a horrible space to give birth in. Birth is supposed to be a ceremony, like a plant medicine ceremony, where you set the space, you light incense, low light, candles, beautiful music, relaxing music. You get into a Zen meditative state. You wade in the waters and the waters calm your body, and the woman just slips into this very tranquil psychedelic state where the divine feminine kind of possesses her body and delivers the baby for her. It's incredibly beautiful. It's absolutely miraculous. So because we've learned that the birth process of the body is perfect and cannot be improved, then it's also true to say that any attempt to improve the birth process will actually only violate it because it's already perfect. So by trying to interfere with the birth process at all, rushing it, introducing drugs, scans, chemicals, you're only doing harm to the birth process. You can't help the body because it's already perfect. You can just help it by surrendering to it. So with all that we've learned about this over the 9 months, with all I just kind of explained to you, it got me thinking the other day that birth is the perfect metaphor for life. And hopefully now you can see that too. Birth is the perfect depiction of how natural law works, because you cannot improve on natural law, right? And by trying to, you only violate it. This is what we've done with our food system, right? By all the pesticides and processing we do with food. Have we improved food at all, you guys? No, right? We've only made food much, much worse and toxic to the body. All we have to do is eat food as it comes out from the earth, naturally. And there's no disease involved, right? So like in every system of society, we can see that by trying to improve upon God's perfect universe, we only do harm to it. So the caveat is that, some of you are probably thinking this question, so I'll address this. Does living from surrender and trust mean that we never do anything? Right? Do we just sit on the couch and watch life unfold and we never act? We never get involved, no actions? Because action would be a non-surrendering. Of course, this is not the case, right? Because surrender requires cooperation. We have to be paying attention to life and the flow of life and listen to when life asks for our cooperation. Because life is relationship, yeah? This is the staple teaching of 40U. Fourth density consciousness is being in loving relationship to life at all times. Life is relationship and you cannot escape it. So when life asks you to cooperate with it, loving relationship is to cooperate, right? So the analogy I've often given is a surfer trying to surf a wave. A surfer cannot surf unless he or she cooperates with the ocean, right? The surfer has to cooperate with the wave that they want to surf by getting into right position, waiting patiently for the wave to come to them. And then at that opportune moment, he or she paddles forward vigorously to catch the momentum of the wave. And then the wave picks them up and the wave does the rest. This is how we cooperate with the flow of life. It's no different. And birth is no different. Even though a woman is supposed to be relaxing into those contractions, this is what every free birth teacher will teach a woman, is birth is a process of intense non-resistance. You're going to feel very intense sensations. We don't even have to call them pain. We can just call them intense sensations. And your job is to melt into those sensations. And when you do that, eventually there will come a time at the end stage of labor when the baby's about to be delivered where a woman feels this full body kind of visceral feeling of it's time to push. And the woman will actually do it without being cued by anybody because she knows best, right? Her body knows best. So there comes a time to push in the birth process. Just like as we live through life, surrendering to the flow of life, there comes a time for us to do something with life, right? To exert effort in that sense and cooperate with the process. So here's the caveat is, if you ever are wondering, is it time to push yet? This is a birth lesson. If a woman's like, should I push yet? A good midwife will say no. If you have to think about it, no is the answer. You'll know when it's time to push because every cell of your body will tell you. It'll be an autonomic reaction, right? Your whole body will really just start doing it. You can't miss it, right? This is how God's will works when we are surrendering to the flow of life. And life, in a sense, is a constant birth process because every moment is a new creation. Life is constantly creating, birthing new life into existence. So if life is in constant creation and flow, we are supposed to be in constant surrender to that flow. And at a certain point, we will be asked, or we will feel the will of God in us saying, do this, do that, go here, go there, do this, don't do this. We'll feel some kind of direction. And so, in the same way as birth works, if you ever have to ask, am I supposed to do this? Or should I not do that? Like if you're wondering, the answer is no. It's not time yet. When it is time for you to act with life, and as we say here, we're always acting with life, never against or apart from life, you cannot miss it. You cannot miss the will of God for you if you are surrendered to it. If you say yes to every unfolding of the present moment, you can't miss the will of God like you can't miss the blue sky when you walk outside. It's impossible that you could miss it because you're in alignment with the law. So in regards to the law of love, what is the law of love? This is our discussion, our main topic today. What is the law of love, if we're going to call it that? We said the law of one is love. The law is love. Well, what is that law? This is the true definition of loving relationship, my friends. This is why obedience to the law of one, as we discussed last week, is loving relationship with the law. The easiest way to summarize the law of one is love. So if love is the law, what is that law? We can't express the law of love in a positive sense, meaning the law of love is do this, always do this or that. Because love is free will. Love allows. Love gives freedom. Love doesn't impose itself. Love doesn't dictate or tell you what to do. None of that's loving. Love is best expressed in the negative as a law. Meaning if you're going to put love as a law, the best way to express it is negatively. And we do that by saying, do no harm. That is the law of love. Love is do no harm. If you do harm to somebody, you automatically are not loving them. If love does any harm, then it's not love anymore. Right? The second love does harm, it's no longer love. Love cannot do harm. Right? So that's the law of loves, do no harm. And this is the law that Jesus expressed in the golden rule. Matthew 7:12. Do unto others as you would have them do unto you. Some translations say, never do unto others what you would not wish to suffer yourself. That's love. And Jesus said, on this one law hangs all the law and the prophets. Do no harm. So then, if the law of one is really the law of do no harm, we cannot do harm to others and have happiness for ourselves. That's what it means. I said this last week, and I'll repeat it again because it bears repeating. The level of happiness that you live with, guys, please hear me on this. The level of happiness you live with, or misery, is a direct indication of how in alignment you are living with the law of one. But alignment with the law of one does not only take place in 3D space-time with our actions and behaviors. That is very much where it takes place, but where our alignment with the law of one takes place first and foremost is here, isn't it? Out of the abundance of the mind, the body acts. Out of the thoughts of the mind, the body behaves. And so the primary relationship we have with the law of one is in our mind, is in our awareness of the holy law. So spiritual intelligence is how aware are you of the law of one, such that when experiences arise, you respond to those experiences in perfect alignment with the law of one, of doing no harm. And this is why the law is bliss. The only way to have bliss is by living in obedience to the law of one, the law of love. The degree of bliss we're able to live with and enjoy is directly dependent on how aligned we are, living and thinking according to the law of one. And guys, this is our birthright. This is not some unreachable feat to live with happiness all the time. You all should be living with happiness all the time, in the sense that it's absolutely available to you. There's nothing holding you back from living with the bliss of God's presence every moment of your life, except for your own violations of the law of one. And so if you're not living with happiness all the time, which you should be, and is totally possible, I assure you, you have to ask yourself, okay, where am I stepping out of alignment with the law? In my mind, in my perceiving. And here's where you're doing it. Here is where you violate the law of one first and foremost, is when you perceive any imperfection in God's universe. I hope y'all are taking notes, because I'm giving you the keys to the kingdom right here. I promise you. We cannot overstate how important what I'm saying is. You step out of alignment with the law of one when you perceive any flaw in God's universe. How you relate to the universe shows how aware you are of the universe, doesn't it? This is what happens when somebody is insane. I give the analogy of like, hey, imagine walking into a psych ward and you talk to some lady in a straitjacket who comes up to you and she's talking to you like you're her ex-lover who left her and abused her, and she's like, how could you do that to me? And you're like, oh, this poor woman, she's not even here. She can't even see who I really am. I'm not her ex-husband or whatever that she's projecting. She's lost in a dream of a delusion. A delusional fantasy world is all she sees. Well, my friends, how many of us are living in that same delusional fantasy as the woman in the straitjacket? Because we believe we're living in an unfair universe that acts imperfectly. We resist, we fight, we complain about what happens. We're like an insane person in a straitjacket. Our actions, our responses to the universe, to life, show that we are not aware of the universe itself. We are not awake and aware in reality itself. So if you fight or resist, control or attach, you are not aware of reality. I know that sounds like a harsh statement, but we should like harsh statements because they hold us to a high standard. If I attach or resist, control or fight against reality at all, meaning the flow of my life experiences, if I think for a moment what has happened to me is imperfect or unfair, or that I'm a victim of it, I am insane and require healing. I promise you it's true. And of course, it doesn't mean you're totally 100% insane. It just means there's still some degree of insanity living in you. And you've got to find it and balance it, right? If you think life behaves or acts imperfectly at all, you are living to some degree in a mental fantasy world. You're picturing a universe that is a cruel and hostile place, something separate from you, when in reality, the universe is perfect bliss and goodness at all times. There is no evil, no shadow at all in God's universe. And if you think one is there, you have imagined it. You have introduced it in your mind. And so since the law of one is the law of love, if I perceive life as being hostile, unfair, separate from me, cruel, victimizing me, shouldn't have happened, bad experience, why is this happening? If I go into that mode at all, I am doing harm in my mind, aren't I? I'm doing harm to myself, which is a violation of the law. In reality, my friends, there is no such universe separate from you, or hostile to you, or unfair to you. The universe is you. Everywhere you look, you see your own mind outpictured. So if you're in an abusive relationship with yourself, harming yourself with thoughts of victimhood and lack and limitation and control, you require healing in those areas because that's an unloving relationship. So practicing loving relationship is to practice the state of trust and surrender. Just like a woman, if she wants to be in loving relationship to her body's birth process, because it's the body, by the way, that gives birth, not the woman, not the personal self in the mind. The body does it on its own. There's many instances, many examples of women who go unconscious for some reason or another. Some women, they get injured or even die, and the body gives birth to the child while the woman's completely unconscious. Many, many instances where this has happened. And that goes to show you the body is doing it all. The divine feminine principle is doing it all. If I want to be in loving relationship to my body during birth, I have to do nothing but surrender to it. So it is with life, yeah? If I want to be in loving relationship with life in the unfolding creation process of life, I have to do no harm, surrender and trust, and cooperate when I'm asked to cooperate. To push when I'm asked to push, and to not push when I'm not being asked. So, this is the question to ask ourselves if we want to live in perfect obedience to the law of one at all times. If we want to live in loving relationship to life at all times, here's the question. How can we be sure we're doing no harm to the universe in any way? And the answer to the question is see only perfection. This is how we do no harm in any way at all, not even mentally, perceptually, or physically. No harm possible if we are seeing perfection at all times. But then you say, but Aaron, give me a break, dude. How am I supposed to see only perfection when I see all these evils and injustices happening everywhere? Good people have bad things happen to them, and horrible people have good things happen to them. Isn't this unfair? How can you expect me to see all these injustices and corruptions as perfect? And I say, very easily. It's the easiest thing in the world. Here's how you do it. You see only obedience or disobedience to the law of one. And isn't that perfect? Isn't it perfect when all you see are beings who are aware of the law and obeying it, or beings who are not aware of the law and are disobeying it and violating it? Everywhere you seem to see evil, there's no such evil there. No such evil exists in God's perfect universe. All you're seeing is spiritual blindness and deviation from the law. But can you make sure you see that? Can you make sure when the mind judges and says, what an evil, cruel bastard who would do such a thing? Can you say, whoa, 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 there's no cruel bastards in God's universe? There's no evil psychopaths in God's universe. There's only children of the Father. There's only beings of light who are aware or unaware based on their evolutionary process of the law. And so if we see somebody disobeying the law grievously, harming children or something like that, we don't call it a second power called evil. Look at this second power in God's universe fighting against and opposing the almighty power of God. Good and evil, these two separate powers coexist and are constantly duking it out. That's Christianity. And Christianity, I grew up in it, so I know, literally believes the devil's behind everything. The devil is like omnipotent in Christianity. Every bad thing is the devil, the devil, the devil. The devil even takes, 3/4 of God's children and drags them into hell to torment them eternally. God only gets to take the maybe 2 billion Christians to heaven, if every denomination's correct, which all of them say that the other ones aren't correct, so who knows. But let's say every Christian denomination at all, everyone's going to heaven who's a Christian. That's only 2 billion people, and that leaves 6 billion people to rot in hell forever. So Satan defeats God 3-1. Satan is the omnipotent power that God's just trying to avoid and escape from. This is the insanity we live under when we believe that evil is real. There is no evil in God's universe. There's only truth, love, and light. And if anything appears to be other than that, it is nothing but a deviation from the law. And that deviation always comes back around upon the deviator. And yes, other people who are also deviating from the law can connect with each other and share negative karma and harm each other, but it's really ultimately their own violations. Because when you're aware of the law of love, of do no harm, you refuse to participate in any kind of harm. Any kind of harm. Mentally, physically, emotionally, spiritually, you cannot do harm to someone because you're so aware of that law, vibrating, throbbing, pulsing through your being. I'm aware only and always of the law of love. And so this is how we live in loving relationship, you guys. We see only perfection happening. And if someone violates the law and we see the karmic consequences of that violation, we say, oh, that's perfect law. Just like a justice system, right? When a judge convicts somebody of a crime, murder or something, and they pronounce them guilty and they get thrown in jail, we say, well, the law's working perfectly. But in God's universe, jail is suffering. In God's universe, prison is mental ignorance and bondage and misery and pain and torment. And this is why Jesus says, if you call me Lord, 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 but you don't do what I command, get away from me, you who practice wickedness. I will banish you into the place where there is weeping and gnashing of teeth, he says. Weeping and gnashing of teeth is like a picture of suffering, right? Pain, agony. Jesus says, if you don't live according to love, if you violate this one law of love God, love your neighbor, I will banish you from my presence, Jesus says. Meaning he's speaking for the law, right? This is how karma works. This is how the law works. I can only love. I cannot do harm. So if you do harm, you are away from me, in the place where there is weeping and gnashing of teeth. And Christianity, over time, not understanding this natural law, invents a kind of fantasy about heaven and hell as places we go later. Oh no, my friends. We don't go to heaven or hell later. We are living in heaven or hell right now, based on our quality of consciousness. Hell is a place on earth just as much as heaven is a place on earth. It's a reality somebody chooses to live in, knowingly or unknowingly, based on their obedience or violation of the law. And so this is also why, by the way, enlightenment doesn't exist as like some kind of state I have to go chase after and attain. There is no such thing as enlightenment as a state somebody achieves. Enlightenment is the idea of, oh, this person, like, suppose you go sit in front of a guru or a sage that people say is enlightened. You sit in front of them, you say, wow, look at this being who's attained this state of freedom. This being will never suffer again. They'll always be in this perfect state of enlightenment and never suffer. That's how the ego thinks about enlightenment. It's like a promise of permanent happiness in the future. Because look, we always suffer from fear of the future. I might suffer this, I might suffer that. Suffering is ahead of me. And enlightenment promises no suffering ahead of me. Oh, that sounds great. How do I get enlightened? Well, you don't, because it doesn't exist. All you can do is be in loving relationship right now with the law of one. Can you see that? There's only this present moment. There is no such enlightenment to be had as a future state you achieve. There is only my relationship to life in the present moment. There is only my quality of consciousness in the present moment. And people we call enlightened are those beings who have learned how to only see perfection and always be in loving relationship with life. That's it. So the question is not, am I enlightened or not? It's, have I trained my mind, my consciousness to see only perfection or not? If I'm seeing imperfection, I'm not fully enlightened. I'm not fully illuminated with the light of knowledge, that only perfection exists in the universe of a perfect God. So if that's what people call enlightenment, great. But it's not a state you achieve. It is a relationship you develop. How many times have you heard me say this? Enlightenment is just the ability to be in loving relationship at all times to everything. And guess what? That's just a practice. The practice is this. when I see a flaw, when I judge an imperfection in someone or something, whether it's a circumstance or a person, I say, oh, bad, wrong, shouldn't be happening. I go into that resistance. Do I notice it and say, whoa, 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 whoa? Who's this separate self implying a flaw in God's perfect universe? I know of no such universe of flaws. I know that this moment or this person is perfect as they are. And so I love them perfectly as they are. I want to see them perfectly as they are. And so when you love someone who's violating from the law, you can see their violations clear as day. You can see where they've mentally strayed away from truth in their thinking or behaving, and you see it only as a cry for help. You don't see evil in need of punishing. You see a cry of help in need of assisting and helping. This is what A Course in Miracles says, right? Sin in the light of love is a mistake to be corrected, not an evil to be punished. And that's where religion has gone astray, right? Picturing heaven and hell as future states, places we go to later. Well, we earn those places later, right? By sinning or not sinning. It's kind of true, right? It's close to the truth. But if we get rid of the past future stuff, we make it all about now. Heaven is a state of consciousness which is in perfect obedience to the law of love. Hell is a state of consciousness which is in violation of the law of love. That's it. And it's all based on loving or unloving relationship. Am I in loving relationship with the present moment? Then I'm surrendered. I'm trusting. My heart is open. I'm not interfering. I'm not doing harm. I'm loving. I'm accepting. I'm allowing. When I'm in loving relationship with life in the present moment, you can call that enlightenment if you want to.